Practical Bushcraft 1 asked me if I could go over the canning equipment needed and give an idea what the cost would be. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to give you totals, so you're going to have to tally it up as we go or whatever, but I can give you an idea how much it's going to cost you. And the first and most important thing you're going to need, if you want to can low acid foods like fish, meat, kale. I know Practical Bushcraft said he wanted to can some wild greens like nettles and asparagus. Those are low acid foods, so you're going to need a pressure canner unless you want to do a very long hot water bath. And this is a Miro pressure canner with a 5, 10, and 15 pound weight. It doesn't have a dial. It has a seal, a rubber gasket that you're going to have to replace every few years. That's probably going to run you about maybe $8 or $10. And that's the only maintenance you're going to need to do on it. The way this one works, you put the weight on there for whatever weight you need, and when it jiggles, you know you're at the right pressure. So you don't have to sit there and babysit it. You can just listen for it to jiggle. Now that Miro is probably going to run you somewhere between 50 and 90 bucks, depending on where you get it and which size you get. I'd recommend getting one that holds 7 quarts. Now this one is an old National number 7, old number 7, and it's a dial gauge pressure canner. It has a weight as well, but this is just a 20 pound weight, and it's just for releasing excess pressure. You have to monitor that dial the whole time and make sure that it stays at 10 or 11 pounds. But this one has a gasket as well, and even though it's quite old, it's still fully functional and safe to use. And this is a 7 quart model as well. Now, there are other pressure canners. I bought this one on Fleabay for I think it was 25 or 35 bucks. I bought a new seal and overpressure plug for $8. So for 45 bucks I had a fully functional pressure canner and cooker, because you can cook in these too, and they're really efficient for cooking. So that covers the pressure canners. It's going to run you anywhere between 35 and 200 on up, depending on which type of pressure canner you get. You can get an All-American, which is a really nice pressure canner. It's made in the USA, and they have all different size ranges, and from what I've seen, the All-Americans have both the weighted gauge and a dial gauge, so it's kind of nice, especially if you live in high altitude areas. But it seems like they're much more expensive. It seems like quite a large expense for canning. The next thing you're going to need, if you want to do jellies and pickles and high acid foods like tomatoes and fruit, is a hot water bath canner. And all a hot water bath canner is a big pot. And I'm just going to give you the dimensions of the pot. That way you can just get any old pot will do. But really, what you don't want cast iron, and I would stay away from aluminum if I could, although the pressure canners are aluminum. The dimensions that you need, it's going to need to be at least 9.5 inches deep, and across the bottom it's going to be about 12.5 inches in diameter. Now if you buy a hot water bath canner, it's going to run you, I don't know, 25 to 55 bucks, and you'll get this nice little canning rack. But I found out that I really don't like the canning rack myself, and the best material is either enamelware or stainless steel. I don't use this I just use the rack that goes in the very bottom, and then I use a jar lifter to pull my jars in and out. So the hot water bath canner, if you buy one, it's going to run you anywhere from probably 25 to 55 bucks. Or you can just get a big stainless steel pot like this. I believe this is either a 5 or 6 gallon pot, and it has the right dimensions to do 7 quarts. I think that was $10. I bought it up north when I was fishing. I don't know if you can find one for 10 bucks these days. And as far as the jar lifter, you can buy a kit that's maybe 10 or 15 bucks, and you get the jar lifter, you get the funnel, you get a magnetic wand for lifting your lids out of the hot water, which you need that, and you also get this little handy headspace measurer, which also doubles as a tool to go around the inside of your jar after you pack the food in to get the air bubbles out, which you have to do that. That covers the canning equipment. Now, a few other things you're going to need that are a little lower priority. Well, you're going to have jars, and they make quart jars. You can get wide mouth or regular mouth, and they go on down pint, half pint, and then these little 4-ounce jelly jars. I personally don't use these because I haven't made any jelly, and that's a pretty small jar. If I was going to make jelly, I would probably use either a half pint or, if possible, a pint. Jars, for a dozen jars, it's going to run you about 8 to 10 bucks for a dozen, regardless of what size you get. Now, when you buy the jars, they come with a ring and a lid. The lids you have to rebuy. You are only supposed to use those one time. The rings will last as long as they're not rusty. Once they start rusting, you're supposed to throw them out or recycle them or whatever. But to buy new lids, the lids only, a dozen lids are anywhere from $1.50 to maybe $2.50, depending on where you get them. Or you can buy the rings with the lids for anywhere between $4 and maybe $6, $7 for a dozen. Everything pretty much comes in dozens. Now, I've seen, I buy ball mason jars, and I saw some other off-brand at Walmart, and they were about $2 to $3 cheaper for a dozen. But I did see a video on YouTube where the guy said that the lids weren't working right, and he thought the glass was a lot thinner. I mean, as far as quart jars go, you can, they make spaghetti jars that are Atlas mason jars. You can use those. You can even use old mayonnaise jars. As long as the lid will fit and it will seal, you can use it. And as long as it's a canning jar. But really, to be honest with you, I just get the wide mouth jars, and I pay for the good ones, the ball. That's all I can find around here is ball. Now, one thing about those lids and rings is what I do is when I'm done canning and the jar is sealed, I take the ring off, so I have plenty of leftover rings. All I really need to do is buy the lids. The jars are reusable as long as there's no chips or anything on the rim where it seals, and the rings are reusable. You just need to buy new lids. So once you get your jars, which is a pretty big expense because you're looking at maybe 10 bucks a dozen, after that, all you really need to do is buy lids, which are about $2 a dozen. Now, when you're doing canning, one important thing is to measure everything exact, because a lot of it depends, the preservation depends on using the right measurements of vinegar or salt in the case of fish or something like that. So you need a scale that is accurate. This is just a cheap scale from the dollar store. It costs $1, but it is accurate, and I can test the accuracy by sitting a gallon of water on there and making sure that it weighs, I believe it's 8.35 pounds. And I know I'm close enough. So you need a scale to weigh the stuff, and you're also going to need a measuring cup. A lot of the canning you do is going to be in large quantities. So you're going to need a big measuring cup. I like a 4-cup measuring cup. And you're also going to need at least a 1/4 cup measuring cup just to make things easier. And you're also going to need a whole set of measuring spoons, all the way from an 1/8 teaspoon up to a tablespoon. Another thing I like to have, because I'm dealing with large quantities, I got this plastic measuring bowl, which is actually 2 liters or 2 quarts. So that's 8 cups. That's nice to have. That's it for the measuring. Actually, one other thing that's nice to have, not an absolute requirement, is a little measuring stick. Because when you put the food in your jars, especially if you're doing like green beans or dill pickles and you're leaving them whole, you want to trim them down so they'll fit in the jars, so you have the proper headspace. So it's nice to have a ruler that you can just lay down and sit your cucumber there and chop it off right at 3, 4, or 5 inches or whatever. You're going to need at least 1 strainer to strain the food out. Now if you're doing jelly, you're going to need a jelly bag and maybe a couple other items. I'm not into the jelly yet, so I don't really know what to tell you there. Now you can pick these strainers up. You might have them around the house, but it's something you're going to need, probably just a few bucks. You're going to need a ladle to ladle the food out to put it in the jars. That might be $1 or $2. And you're going to need some kind of spoon or something to do small work with. Another thing I like to have, and I just have these left over from maple syrup making, is a couple 5-gallon buckets, because when you're washing your vegetables, I mean, you can do it in your kitchen sink if it's clean, but when you clean these vegetables, you want to make sure they're good and clean, and you might even need to scrub them if they got dirt on them, because you don't want any dirt in that food, because botulism, which is the biggest fear of canning that can kill you, it lives in the dirt. So any dirt on there is potential botulism, so you want to get rid of all that dirt. I use 2 5-gallon buckets. I use 1 to wash and I use 1 to rinse. And if the stuff is real dirty, I'll get out another 5-gallon bucket and I'll double rinse it. Of course, you're going to need a bunch of rags. I usually use about 5 different rags. And it's nice to have a couple smaller pots. This is a good size, and this enamelware is pretty inexpensive and it works really good for canning. You just want to make sure that there's no chips or nothing. And if you're worried about chips, then just go with stainless steel and you won't have any worries. But this pot is 9 inches in diameter and 6-inch high. I have another one that's about the same diameter, but it's about 10 inches high. And those two seem to work for all my needs so far. As you can see, you know, it's quite a bit of stuff. I mean, I got 2 pressure canners. This one is borrowed because the seal on this one was no good when I started, but now I got a new seal for it. Whole bunch of rings, a little canning kit, just a boatload of jars, all kinds of spices, sugar, salt, a whole bunch more canning rings, you know, 1, 2, 3 pots, couple strainers, a bunch of measuring equipment, scale, a couple 5-gallon buckets, water, vinegar, rags, and that's about it. Once you get all set up, I mean, if you bought everything brand new and you just didn't shop around, you're probably looking at, you know, a couple $100 to get started. But I got started for under $100. And that was counting that $35 time bomb I bought, pipe bomb. But that's a sweet little canner there. They don't make them like that anymore. It's got a quality gauge on it, which I should have checked. It's got wood handles. You can see that this one here is probably in the 70s or 80s, and it's got plastic handles. But that style of weighted gauge is a nice one to have if you can find one. Anyway, I hope that helps. I'd say maybe a couple $100 to get started, maybe $100 if you shop around, and that would include your jars and everything you need to, all your spices and stuff too, if you were starting complete from scratch. But if you're looking to can low acid foods, you need the pressure canner. That's a must. So if you want to do fish, you want to do meat, you want to do asparagus and wild greens like nettles, or even greens from your garden like kale or green beans, you need a pressure cooker. And like I said, this is an oldie, but it's national, and it's made in the USA, right in, I believe it's Eau Claire, Wisconsin. Anyway, thanks for watching, and thanks for all the comments and support.